On a rainy Thursday afternoon in downtown Seattle, I was sitting near the head of the polished oak conference table in the middle of a high-stakes corporate acquisition meeting when my phone vibrated frantically against my pad of legal notes. Glancing down, I saw my younger brother Tyler's name flashing repeatedly across the glass screen. Excusing myself with a hurried nod to the senior partners, I stepped into the carpeted hallway and tapped the green icon. Before I could even raise the receiver to my ear, Tyler's hysterical shrieks tore through the speaker, breathless, erratic, and utterly terrifying. "Hannah, you need to get to Seattle General Hospital right now," he screamed, his voice cracking with artificial, dramatic panic. "Mom collapsed in the kitchen. Her heart is failing. And the chief surgeon says her insurance won't cover the experimental bioassist cardiac device she needs to survive. They need an immediate cash payment of $155,000 before they can prep the operating room. If you don't wire the money in the next few hours, she isn't going to make it." The hallway seemed to tilt on its axis as cold, paralyzing panic flooded my veins. My breath hitched painfully in my chest, my fingers tightening around the cold metal body of my phone until my knuckles turned stark white. At 30, as a senior corporate litigation attorney, I had faced ruthlessly aggressive opposing counsel in courtrooms across the state. But nothing in my legal training prepared me for the sudden, terrifying specter of losing my own mother. Abandoning my expensive leather briefcase and open case files right on the polished oak conference table, I sprinted down the private elevator bank and rushed out into the heavy Pacific Northwest downpour. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my SUV, my hands trembling so violently that it took 3 agonizing, frustrating attempts just to slide the ignition key into its slot. As I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal, weaving recklessly through the bumper-to-bumper Seattle traffic toward the medical district, my mind spiraled completely out of control. Heavy white rain pelted relentlessly against the windshield, echoing the terrifying, chaotic rhythm of my racing heartbeat. For 10 long, exhausting years, ever since I passed the bar exam with top honors, I had quietly served as the single financial backbone and emergency resource for my entire family. Whenever an unexpected bill arrived, whenever a utility disconnection notice threatened our home, or whenever a sudden debt materialized out of nowhere, I was the dutiful, devoted daughter who quietly wrote the check without asking a single inquiring question. I had spent a whole decade believing that my primary purpose in life was to be their ultimate safety net, their human shield against financial hardship, disaster, and personal suffering. Now, gripping the leather steering wheel with white-knuckled desperation, I wasn't just driving toward a hospital emergency room. I was racing against time to save the mother who gave me life, completely blind to the sinister, calculated maze I was speeding into as I crossed the city. As the windshield wipers swept rhythmically across the fogged glass, painful memories of the past decade flashed through my mind in vivid, relentless detail. While my peers at the law firm were purchasing their first luxury homes or investing in their long-term retirement funds, I was working grueling 80-hour work weeks as a senior corporate attorney, surviving on cold coffee, takeaway meals, and sheer willpower. Every quarterly performance bonus check I earned seemed to disappear immediately into the black hole of my family's endless financial demands. I had quietly paid off tens of thousands of dollars in Tyler's questionable credit card debts, funded his reckless, failed business ventures, and purchased luxury designer wardrobe items for my mother, Eleanor, to keep her happy, content, and satisfied. Meanwhile, my soft-spoken, hard-working father, Robert, who had spent 40 long years breaking his back on the dusty floor of a local manufacturing plant, sat quietly in the background, enduring their relentless entitlement with silent, heavy sorrow. Whenever Dad gently suggested that Tyler needed to find a real job or that Eleanor should spend less money, they would brutally belittle him, mocking his modest pension and treating his quiet dignity like a pathetic personal flaw. Out of intense, unconditional love for my family, I had stepped into the breach, consistently refilling their depleted bank accounts to maintain an artificial peace, foolishly mistaking my toxic enabling for true filial devotion, filial duty, and genuine female strength in this complicated, demanding world. Bursting through the heavy sliding glass doors of the Seattle General Emergency Ward, the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic hit my throat as I sprinted down the gleaming linoleum corridor. My high heels clicked loudly against the polished floor, drowning out the ambient hum of heart monitors, rolling gurneys, and distant intercom pages as I desperately scanned the digital room numbers along the sterile wall. Reaching room 412, I caught a glimpse of my mother's full name printed on the electronic chart beside the doorframe. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird as I reached my trembling hand toward the cold metal door handle, desperate to throw it wide open and throw my arms around her pale, fragile form. But just as my fingertips brushed the metal lever, a powerful, commanding hand clamped tightly around my wrist from behind. Before I could process the sudden physical impact or let out a gasp of surprise, a firm arm wrapped authoritatively around my shoulders and yanked me forcefully backward into a dimly lit medical supply room nearby. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the bright glare of the corridor and plunging me into shadowy isolation. Panic surged through my chest as I spun around to confront my captor, my trained legal instincts instantly preparing me to fight off an unknown attacker in the dark and break free to help my mother in her terrifying time of medical crisis. Quiet! Don't make a single sound, Hannah. An urgent, authoritative whisper hissed through the dim room, pressing a firm finger against my lips before I could utter a word. As my eyes adjusted to the faint light filtering through the door's narrow glass observation pane, I recognized the sharp, intelligent features of senior charge nurse Sheila Jenkins, my best friend from high school whom I hadn't seen in 2 years. Sheila was holding her breath, her face pale with grave intensity, her uniform immaculate beneath her official hospital identification badge. Sheila? What on earth is going on here? I stammered, my voice shaking with raw, overwhelming confusion. Sheila grabbed my shoulders, her grip steady, protective, and unyielding as she leaned in close to my ear. Hannah, listen to me very carefully, Sheila whispered, her eyes burning with fierce, protective resolve. There are massive, undeniable medical anomalies on your mother's intake chart. If you want to protect your hard-earned life savings, your professional reputation, and your sanity, stay hidden right here and look through this glass panel. In a few seconds, you are going to see the absolute, unvarnished truth about what is really happening inside that hospital room. I stood paralyzed against the cold metal storage shelving, my heart hammering violently against my ribs as Sheila positioned me directly in front of the observation window, pointing toward the bedside where my reality was about to shatter completely into a million pieces. Leaning forward until my forehead nearly touched the cold observation glass of the door, I peered into room 412, bracing my heart for a traumatic vision of medical agony. Instead, the scene unfolding before my eyes instantly paralyzed my mind, freezing the blood in my veins. My mother, Eleanor, was sitting completely upright in the center of the hospital mattress, her back straight and her complexion radiant with normal, healthy color. She wasn't hooked up to a single cardiac monitor. There was no IV line dripping fluids into her veins, and no oxygen mask obscured her face. In fact, she looked entirely relaxed and comfortable, casually smoothing down the collar of her floral gown while inspecting her freshly manicured nails under the bright overhead light. There was no failing heart, no life-threatening medical emergency, and no frantic surgical team fighting against time to save her life. The entire terrifying crisis was nothing more than a meticulously manufactured illusion, a cruel theatrical performance designed to exploit my deepest fears and extract my savings. Standing near the foot of the bed was my brother, Tyler, wearing a relaxed smile that held not a single trace of the hysterical panic he had screamed through the phone just 20 minutes earlier. Beside him stood a middle-aged man in a crisp white lab coat, with a stethoscope draped carelessly around his neck. Dr. Sterling. They were not reviewing urgent medical charts or discussing survival odds. They were standing together like comfortable business partners, quietly closing an ordinary transaction. Dr. Sterling shifted his weight uncomfortably from one foot to the other, nervously glancing toward the hallway window, as if constantly calculating the catastrophic risk of his actions. "Are you absolutely certain the funds will be wired today, Tyler?" Dr. Sterling asked hesitantly, tapping his silver pen against a blank medical clipboard. Falsifying a cardiac emergency of this magnitude and faking official intake records is a massive criminal risk that could easily cost me my medical license and land me in federal prison. Tyler let out a short, dismissive laugh, leaning casually against the wall with absolute, arrogant confidence. "I told you a dozen times, Doc. The cash is not an issue. My older sister, Hannah, is a senior corporate litigation attorney at a top firm downtown. She pulls in more than enough money to cover this easily, and she has been funding our entire lives for a decade. She will sign whatever financial liability paperwork you shove into her hands the second she walks through that door in tears. She always pays." Dr. Sterling exhaled a sharp, heavy breath, adjusting his glasses as a greedy smile crossed his face. "All right, as long as my cut is paid directly in cash to clear my gambling markers with the syndicate." A sickening wave of cold nausea washed over me in the dark supply closet as the horrific truth sank in. My own brother was bribing a corrupt physician to fabricate a fatal diagnosis. and I was the designated bank account meant to fund their illegal operation. Before I could process the sickening reality of Tyler's betrayal, my mother reached over to the bedside table and casually picked up a plastic water cup. She took a slow, unhurried sip through the straw, looking completely unbothered by the criminal conspiracy being negotiated right in front of her. She looked directly at her son, her maternal eyes hardening into a cold, transactional stare that I had never seen before. "Just make sure you keep my share of the money separate, Tyler," Eleanor instructed bluntly, her voice carrying through the glass pane with chilling clarity. "I am not sitting in this uncomfortable hospital room all day long pretending to be on the brink of death for nothing. I expect my 30% cut transferred to my private account immediately, so I can book that Mediterranean cruise with my friends." Those harsh, greedy words echoed in my ears like a heavy gavel striking solid wood, shattering the sacred image of motherhood I had cherished my entire life. My mother was not a passive participant or a confused victim being manipulated by her son. She was an active, willing co-conspirator in an extortion scheme aimed directly at her own daughter. All those years I had spent working 80-hour work weeks, sacrificing my youth and peace of mind to support them, meant absolutely nothing to her. To the woman who had brought me into this world, I was never a beloved daughter. I was merely a lucrative financial asset to be liquidated for luxury leisure. The devastating sting of her words had barely settled when Tyler pulled his smartphone from his jacket pocket, turning the screen toward Dr. Sterling with a smug, triumphant grin. "You don't even need to worry about the upfront cash deposit, Sterling," Tyler said smoothly, his voice dripping with repulsive pride. "My loan sharks will be paid off by noon today. I already extracted the initial cash cushion from another source an hour ago." Dr. Sterling frowned, adjusting his clipboard. "I thought you said your lawyer's sister was funding the entire operation." "She is paying the official hospital bill," Tyler replied, letting out a sharp, cruel laugh. "But for my immediate gambling debts, I called my old man, Robert. I phoned him in a fake panic, crying that the hospital administration refused to prep the operating room unless we provided an immediate cash deposit. The naive old fool didn't even question it. Terrified of losing his wife, he voluntarily authorized an emergency transfer of his entire savings, the $155,000 he withdrew from his 401k pension last week." Eleanor let out a low, amused chuckle. "Your father always was an absolute fool under pressure," she remarked, completely unfazed that her honest husband of 40 years had just been robbed of his life savings. A fierce, icy rage ignited deep within my soul as I remembered my father's tired, kind eyes. A good man, currently weeping somewhere in traffic, completely unaware that his wife and son had stripped away his retirement. Sterling cleared his throat, steering the conversation back to the immediate legal mechanics of their financial trap as he handed a heavy hospital clipboard to Tyler. "This is the official financial guarantor liability contract," Sterling instructed, his tone turning strictly professional. "Your father's stolen cash covers your personal gambling debts and my off-the-books fee. However, A fake emergency surgical procedure of this magnitude generates an official hospital invoice exceeding $155,000. Someone must be legally bound to that remaining balance in the hospital billing system. Tyler took the pen, running his thumb down to the primary signature line with a confident smirk. And that is where my sister Hannah comes in. When she is stressed and emotional, she never reads the fine print.
Exactly, Sterling confirmed with a chilling smirk. When she arrives, she will be emotionally devastated. Use her panic. Shove this clipboard into her hands and demand her signature immediately, claiming the surgeons cannot scrub in without it. Once she signs on the guarantor line, she is legally bound to the debt, and hospital billing will garnish her corporate income if she refuses to pay. Seeing the precise, predatory mechanics of their trap laid bare, the terrified, heartbroken daughter inside me died completely in that dark closet. In her place stood a formidable, ruthless corporate attorney, ready to unleash the full weight of the law against the blood relatives who had dared to treat her devotion as weakness. Standing in the shadowy quiet of the medical supply closet, the agonizing sting of betrayal gradually crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard clarity within my spirit. The devoted, self-sacrificing daughter who had spent an entire decade bending over backward to satisfy her family's endless financial demands dissolved completely in that dark room, making way for the formidable, calculating corporate litigator I had spent years training to become. I realized that bursting into room 412 in a dramatic rage would solve nothing. It would only allow them to spin elaborate lies, gaslight my emotional reactions, and play the innocent victims before our relatives. Instead of reacting with useless emotion, I reached into my tailored blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone with steady, deliberate hands. With practiced professional precision, I swiped down on the glass display to dim the screen brightness to absolute 0, ensuring no unexpected glare or light reflection through the observation window would betray my hidden position. I opened a high-definition audio recording application and tapped the red record button. Placing the phone's microphone directly against the narrow gap of the doorframe, I captured every single syllable echoing from inside the room with pristine audio clarity. The digital timer ticked quietly in the darkness, recording Dr. Sterling explicitly confirming his cash bribe, my brother boasting about stealing my father's 401k pension, and my mother demandingly calculating her percentage cut of the extortion money. Each second of clear audio was an indestructible legal weapon, documenting the exact moment my blood relatives transformed into criminal adversaries. As the recording continued to capture their damning conversation, my mind raced ahead with razor-sharp focus to execute a swift financial intervention to protect my innocent father's life savings. Leaving the audio recording active in the background, I opened my secure messaging application with one hand, composing an urgent, encrypted communication to the head of the fraud division at my law firm's corporate partner bank. Leveraging my direct professional authority and citing emergency wire fraud protocols, I initiated an immediate emergency fraud freeze on my father Robert's recently authorized wire transfer. I attached a quick audio snippet of Tyler boasting about deceiving Dad into transferring his 401k funds under false pretenses. Within 3 short minutes, a subtle vibration in my palm confirmed that the bank's security team had intercepted the outbound transaction, safely freezing the $155,000 in a secure escrow holding account before it could ever reach Tyler's offshore loan shark accounts.
A profound sense of relief and quiet triumph washed over my soul in that dark supply closet. For 10 long years, I had allowed them to treat my generosity as a financial weakness. But today, my professional competence and razor-sharp legal instincts became my father's ultimate shield against destruction. They believed they were executing a flawless, predatory heist against their own family, entirely oblivious to the fact that the financial trap had already been reversed against them in total silence as I stood watching them through the glass. When their hushed footsteps inside room 412 drifted away toward the far window, Nurse Sheila quietly unlatched the supply closet door, letting me step back out into the bright linoleum corridor. I took 3 slow, grounding breaths, adjusting my posture and forcing my breathing to become shallow and erratic. I rubbed my eyes hard until tears welled up, transforming myself instantly into the terrified, desperate younger sister they expected to exploit. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy door of room 412, letting out a carefully calculated, trembling gasp as I rushed inside. Tyler immediately turned around, stepping forward to put on an award-winning performance of a distressed, grieving son, grabbing my shoulders with fake emotion and tearful urgency. Dr. Sterling stepped up with professional gravity, shoving the heavy hospital clipboard toward me and pointing directly to the primary guarantor's signature line, urging me to sign immediately so the surgical team could scrub in. Taking the silver pen with a violently shaking hand, I did not sign blindly as they anticipated. Leveraging my extensive legal training, I quickly and discreetly scribbled 4 crucial words directly above the signature line in fine cursive print. Signed under reservation of rights, subject to EHR audit. Then I signed my legal name, Hannah Miller. That tiny legal reservation rendered the financial debt obligation completely conditional and legally void upon proof of fraud, turning their prized liability contract into a fatal evidentiary trap that would destroy them in court. The moment my pen left the paper, Tyler's eyes gleamed with repulsive, arrogant triumph as Dr. Sterling snatched the clipboard back, claiming he was rushing to notify the surgical administration. However, Tyler immediately stepped into my personal space, his voice laced with sharp, impatient aggression as he demanded to know when the initial cash wire would clear. "We need the $155,000 cleared right now, Hannah," Tyler barked, attempting to maintain his facade of grief while glaring at my phone screen. "The medical billing office won't authorize the BioAssist equipment release until the cash transaction settles." Looking him straight in his eyes, I maintained my fake, tear-streaked expression of helpless panic, executing a brilliant stall tactic to buy critical time for my next move. "I already initiated the wire transfer from my phone, Tyler," I lied softly, injecting a desperate tremor into my voice. "But because it is such a massive sum, the bank's automated fraud department placed a temporary security verification hold on the funds. I am waiting for the regional branch manager to call me back to authorize the release."
Tyler cursed aggressively under his breath, pacing the floor in visible frustration. He genuinely believed his scheme was succeeding and that bureaucratic bank protocols were the only obstacle in his path, completely unaware that his stolen cash was already frozen and that I was merely buying time for my ultimate legal trap to close in around him completely.
Slipping quietly out of the room under the guise of making an urgent private phone call to my bank manager, I walked briskly down the hallway and ducked into a quiet, secluded stairwell. Pulling out my smartphone, I dialed the direct private number of Dr. Colin Hayes, the Director of Health Information Management at Seattle General Hospital. 2 years prior, I had represented Dr. Colin Hayes pro bono in a complex contractual dispute that saved his medical career, and he owed me an unpayable debt of professional gratitude. "Hannah, what's going on?" Dr. Hayes answered on the second ring. In a calm, razor-sharp voice, I gave him my mother Eleanor's full name and date of birth, requesting an immediate back-end administrative audit of her electronic health records. Within 2 minutes, the sound of rapid keyboard typing echoed through the speaker. "Good Lord, Hannah," Dr. Hayes whispered in pure shock. "Dr. Sterling accessed her file exactly 22 minutes ago and overwrote the initial intake notes. The original emergency room intake chart, signed by the attending resident, documents a routine, mild case of appendicitis requiring basic observation, not a cardiac event. Print the original chart, the modified chart, and the full EHR audit log showing Sterling's login credentials and timestamps," I instructed with absolute authority. "I need official, stamped hard copies right now, in my hands." The trap was fully loaded, and justice was about to be served against those who had so cruelly betrayed us in our time of vulnerability. With the official stamped EHR evidence securely tucked inside my blazer pocket, I stood in the quiet stairwell and executed the next phase of my strategy, assembling an undeniable circle of family witnesses. I knew from years of courtroom litigation that toxic, narcissistic manipulators like my brother Tyler and mother Eleanor thrived in shadows and private confrontations, where they could easily distort the truth, play the helpless victims, and gaslight those around them. To dismantle their elaborate illusion permanently, I needed to drag their criminal scheme into the bright, uncompromising light of public scrutiny. Pulling up my family contact list, I first dialed my soft-spoken father, Robert, pitching my voice to sound breathless and trembling with urgency as I urged him to get to room 412 immediately. Next, I systematically called Aunt Susan, Uncle Gary, and half a dozen of my older cousins living across the Seattle area. My script was brief, precise, and devastatingly effective. I informed them that Eleanor's condition was crashing. The medical situation was critical, and if they wished to say their potential farewells, they needed to arrive at the Seattle General Emergency Ward without a single moment of delay. Within 3 minutes, a massive, unstoppable chain reaction was set into motion. My extended relatives, believing they were responding to a tragic family catastrophe, abandoned their workday schedules and rushed toward the hospital. By summoning the entire family network, I ensured that when the truth was exposed, Tyler and Eleanor would have zero room to manipulate the narrative. Immediately after summoning my extended family, I turned my attention to the legal and institutional forces
that would formally execute justice. Standing near the stairwell window, overlooking the rain-slicked Seattle streets, I drafted a confidential, high-priority electronic transmission to the Chief Inspector of the Hospital Ombudsman's Office and the Fraud Division of the King County Sheriff's Department. Attached to the secure message were two incontrovertible pieces of evidence: the high-definition audio recording of Dr. Sterling bargaining his cash bribe, alongside my brother's explicit confession, and the official stamped EHR audit log detailing the exact timestamps when Sterling overwrote the initial appendicitis diagnosis. As a corporate attorney, I knew that presenting raw digital metadata alongside certified administrative documents removed any possibility of plausible deniability. In my accompanying legal statement, I requested the immediate dispatch of law enforcement officers and hospital security personnel directly to room 412, citing active extortion, federal medical malpractice, and ongoing wire fraud against a vulnerable senior citizen. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone chimed with a priority response from the sheriff's duty sergeant, confirming that a uniformed officer on patrol in the medical district was already en route to the emergency department. By involving both institutional oversight and local law enforcement, I ensured that this would not devolve into a mere domestic argument brushed off by hospital staff. The legal mechanisms were moving forward with cold, unstoppable momentum, preparing to deliver a swift, decisive reckoning to the predatory conspirators holding court inside that hospital room. At precisely 11 o'clock in the morning, the automatic glass doors of the Seattle General Emergency Ward slid open continuously as a chaotic wave of panicked relatives spilled into the sterile building. Aunt Susan, Uncle Gary, and nearly 15 cousins rushed down the linoleum corridor, their faces pale with profound worry, whispering frantic prayers among themselves as they searched for room 412. The sudden influx of nearly 20 family members created a dramatic bottleneck outside the doorway, drawing curious, concerned glances from passing nurses and floor staff. Having abandoned their jobs, corporate meetings, and daily family routines upon receiving my urgent calls, the extended family stood packed tightly together in the hallway, their collective anxiety vibrating through the cold, sterile air. I stood quietly near the central nursing station, alongside Nurse Sheila, clutching the sealed manila envelope containing the stamped EHR audit documents tightly against my side, watching the crowd gather. The sheer volume of people created an inescapable, untamperable public auditorium right outside my mother's door. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin present represented a lifetime of shared family history, moral reputation, and social accountability, making it completely impossible for Tyler or Eleanor to retreat into private gaslighting or twist the story once the truth was revealed. The corridor grew thick with unbearable electric tension as family members pressed forward, peering through the glass observation panel, completely convinced they were about to witness a tragic, desperate medical battle for my mother's survival in real time. Inside room 412, completely oblivious to the legal web closing in around them, my mother and brother were putting on a masterclass in emotional manipulation and deceptive theater. Eleanor lay completely flat across the hospital mattress, her eyes closed tightly against the harsh overhead fluorescent lights as she emitted weak, breathless groans whenever an aunt or cousin stepped near the bed. She clutched her chest with a trembling hand, gasping dramatically for air, creating a heart-wrenching spectacle of frail vulnerability that brought several of my older female cousins to heavy tears. Standing right beside her pillow, Tyler delivered a flawless performance as the stoic, grief-stricken son, carrying the unbearable weight of a tragic family crisis on his young shoulders. He maintained a firm, comforting grip on Eleanor's shoulder, solemnly patting her hand while greeting the arriving relatives with tearful, weary nods. Whenever someone whispered an anxious question about her diagnosis, Tyler would lean in with hushed, dramatic reverence, claiming her heart was failing rapidly and that the chief surgical team was standing by in the hallway, completely prepped, but unable to scrub in until final financial clearance was issued by hospital administration. His performance was so convincing, so thoroughly refined through years of domestic practice, that the surrounding relatives shook their heads in sympathetic sorrow, praising Tyler's selfless devotion while glaring angrily down the hallway, wondering why the hospital billing department was being so heartless, cruel, and cold toward a dying woman in need. Suddenly, the heavy crowd outside the door parted as my father, Robert, rushed through the corridor, his face pale, his clothes disheveled, and his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning, his eyes bloodshot from weeping during his frantic drive across the city. Pushing past his weeping relatives, Dad burst into room 412 and collapsed heavily onto his knees beside Eleanor's hospital bed. He grabbed her limp hand with both of his, pressing her fingers against his trembling forehead as uncontrollable sobs racked his fragile frame. "Eleanor, sweetheart, please hold on," he wept softly, his voice breaking with raw, devastating agony as he whispered desperate prayers to the woman he had loved for over 40 years. Dr. Sterling stepped into the room at that exact moment, carrying his official hospital clipboard and raising his voice to announce to the crowded space that the surgical team required immediate payment authorization before transporting the patient. Hearing this, Dad scrambled to his feet with desperate energy, his shaking hands reaching into his back pocket to pull out his leather wallet. With trembling fingers, he extracted a gold credit card and a wrinkled checkbook, thrusting them toward Dr. Sterling with frantic desperation. "How much do you need right now, doctor?" Dad demanded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I will pay the entire deposit today. Take my credit card. Take a blank check. Just take my wife into that operating room before her heart stops." At the exact moment my father raised his trembling hands to present his credit card and checkbook to save his wife, Dr. Sterling's face flushed pale with visible, erratic panic. Step by step, the corrupt physician physically moved forward, raising a hand to block my father's card from reaching the billing clip. Sterling knew with absolute certainty that if Robert processed a payment through the hospital's legitimate financial portal, the transaction would be routed to the medical center's official bank account, rather than the shell company account he and Tyler had secretly established. Furthermore, attempting to process a charge on Dad's drained account would trigger an immediate overdraft alert, unraveling the entire scam before they secured their cash payout. Sir, put your credit card away immediately, Dr. Sterling interjected, forcing his voice into an authoritative, rigid tone. Hospital billing policies for high-risk experimental procedures are strictly regulated under federal healthcare guidelines. Because your daughter Hannah has already executed the official primary guarantor liability contract, all emergency fees must be processed exclusively through her verified corporate financial accounts. Accepting third-party funds now would void the surgical contract and delay your wife's operation. Tyler immediately grabbed Dad's arm, yanking him back aggressively. Dad, listen to the doctor. Stop wasting precious time, Tyler barked, pointing an accusing finger toward me. Hannah makes corporate lawyer money and signed the paperwork. Let her pay the bill so they can save Mom. This bizarre, aggressive refusal to accept a husband's payment ignited a sharp wave of suspicion among the gathered relatives. Before Tyler could physically drag my bewildered father toward the billing desk, I took 2 slow, deliberate steps into the center of room 412, raising the sealed manila envelope high into the air. The chaotic whispers of 20 gathered family members instantly died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence as every eye turned toward me. Nobody is paying a single dime for a fake surgery today, I announced, my voice ringing out with pristine, unshakable legal authority that echoed down the sterile corridor. Dr. Colin Hayes stepped through the crowd of relatives, positioning himself directly beside me, his official Director of Health Information Management badge gleaming clearly against his coat. Dr. Hayes turned to my father, then addressed the silent circle of aunts, uncles, and cousins. I oversee medical records and health data compliance for Seattle General Hospital, Dr. Hayes declared in a booming, professional tone. I have personally performed a back-end administrative audit of Eleanor Miller's emergency intake scans and primary clinical notes. The patient does not have a failing heart. She is suffering from a routine, mild case of appendicitis that requires simple observation, not an operating room. She is in absolutely zero immediate danger. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Aunt Susan covered her mouth in sheer horror. I broke the official red seal on the envelope, pulling out the certified audit logs. This official metadata proves that Dr. Sterling logged into the system exactly 25 minutes ago, deleted the original diagnosis, and manually typed in a fake cardiac crisis to commit federal medical fraud. As Dr. Sterling opened his mouth to issue a frantic, complex medical denial to discredit Dr. Hayes, I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket, adjusted the media volume to its absolute maximum limit, and pressed play on the recorded audio file. The crystal clear recording blasted through the silent room, echoing off the clinical walls for every single relative to hear. Are you absolute certain the funds will be wired today, Tyler? Dr. Sterling's recorded voice asked. She will sign whatever financial liability paperwork you shove into her hands. She always pays, Tyler's arrogant tone responded. Then my mother's unmistakable, sharp voice filled the air, dripping with unvarnished greed. Just make sure you keep my share of the money separate, Tyler. I am not sitting in this uncomfortable hospital room all day long pretending to be on the brink of death for nothing. The room froze into total, paralyzed shock. On the bed, Eleanor's eyes snapped wide open, her fake exhaustion vanishing instantly as the supposedly dying woman sat straight up, staring at my phone with her jaw dropped open in sheer terror. The recording continued playing, capturing Tyler boasting about deceiving my father into transferring his entire 401k pension to clear his gambling debts. My father stood motionless, his chest heaving as the horrifying reality finally clicked into place. All the blood drained from Dr. Sterling's face as he stumbled backward into a heart monitor, his professional arrogance crumbling into raw, helpless panic as he realized his medical career and personal freedom were over forever. Cornered by the irrefutable digital evidence and surrounded by the disgusted, furious glares of their own blood relatives, the predatory alliance between my mother and brother violently collapsed in real time. Realizing his extortion scheme had completely imploded, Tyler instantly turned on his mother to save his own skin. "Don't look at me like that!" Tyler screamed, pointing a shaking, desperate finger directly at Eleanor. "This whole thing was her idea. She is the one who demanded a 30% cut from the money so she could buy designer clothes and book a luxury Mediterranean cruise. She manipulated me into setting this up." Eleanor gasped loudly, her face twisting into wild rage as she swung her legs off the mattress, her fake illness completely forgotten. "You ungrateful, lying little brat!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice echoing down the corridor as she pointed right back at him. "You dragged me into this nightmare because you owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to violent loan sharks. You promised me a trip, and now you're trying to set your own mother up to take the criminal fall?" The two of them viciously tore each other apart in the center of the room, screaming vile insults, exposing the full depth of their mutual greed, and trading accusations of theft in front of 20 stunned family members. Uncle Gary spat on the floor near Tyler's feet, while Aunt Susan turned her back in absolute disgust. My father stood silently between them, his eyes hollow with devastating heartbreak, as he watched his wife and son expose their true, toxic nature. The explosive screaming match was abruptly cut short as two uniformed King County Sheriff deputies and the chief hospital inspector pushed authoritatively through the crowded doorway. Dr. A's immediately handed the certified EHR audit logs and printed metadata directly to the inspector. Reviewing the documents, the inspector's face hardened into cold fury as he turned to face Dr. Sterling. "Unclip your ID badge and surrender your credentials immediately," the chief inspector ordered sharply. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Our legal department is transferring this electronic audit trail directly to the state medical board and the district attorney for federal healthcare fraud and attempted extortion." Dr. Sterling's hands trembled violently as he unclipped his badge, dropping it onto the linoleum floor before staring silently at the ground in complete defeat. The lead sheriff deputy stepped forward, pulling 2 pairs of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. With swift, professional precision, the deputy snapped the cold metal cuffs around Dr. Sterling's wrists, while the second deputy grabbed Tyler, twisting his arms behind his back and clicking the steel restraints securely into place. Tyler thrashed helplessly, weeping and begging Dad to pay his bail. But my father simply turned his back, refusing to offer a single word of comfort. The entire extended family stood in silent, unified judgment as the deputies escorted the handcuffed conspirators down the long corridor. Their empire of deceit had finally crumbled, leaving them to face the catastrophic legal consequences of their own predatory choices. As the sharp echoes of the handcuffs clicking shut faded down the quiet corridor, a profound, transformative silence descended upon room 412. My father, Robert, stood motionless near the foot of the hospital bed, his chest heaving as 40 years of quiet endurance, silent tolerance, and unappreciated sacrifice crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve within his soul. The gentle, soft-spoken man who had spent 4 long decades breaking his back at a manufacturing plant to provide for an ungrateful household was gone forever, replaced by a father standing tall in his reclaimed, unshakable dignity. He turned his eyes toward Eleanor, who was sitting on the edge of the mattress, suddenly looking pathetically small, stripped of her deceptive performance, luxury pretenses, and social status. "I spent 40 years loving you, Eleanor," Dad said, his voice surprisingly calm, deep, and utterly devoid of anger, yet carrying a cold, absolute finality that echoed off the clinical walls. "I bore your endless demands, your harsh words, and your constant disrespect because I foolishly believed keeping peace at any cost was my marital duty. But today, you actively helped our son rob me of my life savings and attempted to bankrupt our daughter. The second I walk out of this building, I am calling my attorney to file for an immediate divorce. You will not receive another single dime from my hard work." He turned his piercing gaze toward the empty doorway, where Tyler had been led away in chains. "And Tyler is permanently stripped from my will today. I no longer have a wife, and I no longer have a son." Seeing the devastating weight of the day pressing down heavily on my father's tired shoulders, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around his trembling frame, holding him tightly against my chest. As he rested his weary head against my shoulder, I leaned in close to his ear and whispered the words that would finally restore his peace of mind and heal his broken spirit. "Dad, look at me," I said softly, pulling back to meet his bloodshot, tear-filled eyes with a warm, reassuring smile. "Your retirement money is completely safe." The moment I realized what Tyler was doing, I leveraged my legal authority with my law firm's partner bank to initiate an emergency fraud freeze on your wire transfer. The $155,000 you withdrew from your 401k pension was intercepted in escrow before it could ever reach Tyler's loan sharks, and it has already been safely returned to your primary savings account. Tears of pure, unadulterated relief welled up in my father's eyes as the crushing terror of financial ruin evaporated into the warm afternoon air. For 40 long years, Dad had lived under the constant threat of losing everything he had worked for. But in that quiet, sacred moment, he realized his lifetime of honest labor was protected forever. He squeezed my hand with overwhelming gratitude, realizing that the daughter he had raised with love and quiet integrity had become his ultimate guardian, ensuring that his golden years of retirement would be spent in absolute comfort, dignity, and financial security. Before my father and I turned to leave that sterile hospital room forever, Eleanor scrambled off the mattress, stumbling toward us with her hands outstretched, her voice cracking in desperate, pathetic pleas for financial salvation. "Hannah, please, you're a high-powered corporate attorney." Eleanor wept hysterically, her eyes wide with frantic, raw terror as she realized the catastrophic legal reality falling upon her. "You have to hire the best criminal defense attorneys in the state for Tyler and me. The police are going to prosecute us for federal healthcare fraud and extortion. You have to pay my medical bills and fix this mess like you always do." I stopped near the open threshold, turning back to face her with a calm, sterile detachment that felt completely liberating to my soul. "I am not paying a single dollar of your hospital bill, Eleanor," I stated in a cold, unyielding tone that cut through her frantic wailing. "I am not hiring defense attorneys for you or Tyler. Nor will I ever represent either of you in a courtroom. For 10 long years, I allowed you to treat my unconditional love as an open bank account, and my professional competence as your personal cleanup service. But my enabling ends right here, right now." Pulling out my smartphone directly in front of her weeping eyes, I opened my settings and permanently blocked both Eleanor's and Tyler's phone numbers forever. You are entirely on your own to face the legal consequences of your choices. Do not ever attempt to contact me again in this life. As we walked into the main hospital lobby, the chief administrator and the hospital ombudsman stepped forward to greet us warmly, accompanied by senior charge nurse Sheila Jenkins. The chief administrator placed a respectful hand on Sheila's shoulder, officially announcing before the assembled administrative staff that Sheila was being formally commended and promoted to Emergency Department Clinical Director for her extraordinary moral courage, swift whistleblowing action, and unyielding commitment to patient advocacy and institutional integrity. Sheila's decisive intervention had not only protected my vulnerable family from catastrophic financial extortion, but had also shielded Seattle General Hospital from a devastating federal scandal and corrupt medical malpractice. Tears of genuine joy filled Sheila's eyes as her colleagues applauded her bravery throughout the sunlit lobby. I stepped forward and embraced my high school best friend tightly, my heart overflowing with profound gratitude for the woman who had stood as my guardian angel in the dark supply room. "You saved my father's life, protected my future, and brought the hidden truth to light, Sheila," I whispered warmly, pulling back to look into her shining eyes. "As long as I am a practicing corporate attorney, you and your family will have my pro bono legal protection for the rest of your life. Whenever you need an advocate in your corner, I will be there, without question." In honoring Sheila's moral courage, I realized that true emotional healing comes when we surround ourselves with people of genuine integrity, loyalty, and selfless character. Gentle afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall glass atrium of Seattle General Hospital as I linked my arms securely through my father's, guiding him out into the fresh, rain-cleansed Pacific Northwest air. The heavy, dark rain clouds that had blanketed the city of Seattle all morning had parted completely, giving way to a brilliant blue sky and the crisp, invigorating scent of evergreen pine trees. As we descended the broad concrete steps toward my car, I felt an invisible 10-pound weight lift cleanly off my chest, replaced by a radiant sense of lightness, sovereignty, and profound inner peace. For 30 long years, I had carried the exhausting, invisible burden of trying to buy my family's love through endless financial sacrifices, foolishly believing that self-neglect was the required price of belonging. But standing beside my father in the warm sunshine, watching the healthy color return to his face as he breathed in the cool air of personal freedom, I knew that the toxic cycle was broken forever. I had built unassailable boundaries, forged in legal truth, self-worth, and self-respect, reclaiming my life, my hard-earned assets, and my dignity. I turned to my father, squeezing his arm with deep tenderness, and smiled with a quiet, unshakable joy. "Let's go home, Dad," I said softly. For the first time in my adult life, my phone remained completely silent. And as we drove into the bright afternoon, I knew my future was finally, beautifully, and unconditionally my own, forever in this world.